He's recovering from a different place.
Good morning and welcome to Worldwide Wisdom. Today we're learning about the spirituality of the kosher signs of the animals. This is what we're learning about today and why it is that some animals are kosher and some aren't. Why is it that not all animals are created equal? What makes it that one animal is kosher and one animal is not? There's more than just a culinary curiosity here. In addition to the fact that God said so, fair enough, because when God tells us in the Torah that this is how you do it, then that's how you're supposed to follow, right? However, there also, Chassidus opens our eyes to help us understand and appreciate the reason behind the Torah's laws. You know, as Jews, we aspire to try to understand the meaning of the Torah, not that our fulfillment depends upon our understanding. If you can understand the meaning, the secret behind the law, that's a bonus point. But it's not that if I don't understand it, I won't fulfill it, but rather that I do it because that's what God told me to do. And this is, in fact, what the Jewish people said. When God offered us the Torah, he asked us if you want the Torah, and we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will fulfill it, and then we'll try to understand it. So first and foremost, we're going to do, and only afterwards we're going to try to comprehend. This is the approach of a Jew. This is about commitment. You know, it's interesting. When it comes to marriages today, people tend to think of marriage in terms of convenience. Would you agree to that? No? Oh, marriage is just plain inconvenient?
Not that it's convenience. It's you're marrying someone because you want to spend your life with them.
Because it's convenient. Because they make you feel comfortable. They make you feel good. You love them. But in Torah,
if you think of love as convenience.
Thank you so much. In Torah, we don't marry out of convenience. Well, think of it this way. What happens when marriage is not working out? What happens when the relationship is not what you expected it to be? What's going to happen then? You separate. But in Torah, we marry not out of convenience, but out of commitment. The relationship is founded upon a principle, upon the fact that God put us together. That we are two halves of one soul that have been designated for each other. We're supposed to be there for each other. And in fact, if you want to be able to reach your highest truth, it's going to happen by facing your spouse. You know, when King Solomon tells us, as water reflects the face, so too does the heart of one fellow reflect that of the heart of one man reflect that of his fellow, of his mate. An interesting interpretation of this verse is that if you want to experience a reflection of your own heart, look into your spouse. Right? If you want to experience your own authenticity, then look into your spouse, because your spouse is going to push your buttons. Your spouse is going to provoke you, is going to force you out of your comfort zones to be able to discover your deeper truth, right? So this is the secret of Jewish marriage, which is not out of convenience, but a relationship rather out of commitment. And that is why the way that the Jewish people forged the relationship with God at the very beginning. When God asked the other nations if they want the Torah, each one of them asked a question out of convenience. Well, what does it say? That was what they asked the other nations. Well, what does it say in the Torah?
Before I commit.
Exactly, before I commit to it. And any normal person would do that. You know, if I offered you a contract and I said, would you mind signing here? You'd probably ask me, well, what does it say? What am I signing? Right?
If you were Hashem, I wouldn't ask.
So if you're Hashem, it depends who's asking, right? If it's some guy with a heavy cloak on a street in Manhattan that's asking you to sign a deal, maybe not, right? Probably not, right? But if it's God Almighty, if it's your own spouse, if there's trust, if there's commitment, then of course I'll do it, right? So this is the difference between the relationship of the other nations and the Jews. The other nations were offered the Torah by God, and they all asked, well, what does it say? And then when God told them, they said, no, thank you. When it comes to the Jewish people being offered the Torah, they said, of course, we will do, and we will then try to understand. So when it comes to the laws of kosher, we have the laws of kosher in the 6th Torah portion. You'll find them in the Chumash on page 663. We're going to come across them in just a moment. But if we're able to understand also the reason behind the laws, that's a bonus. And that's something which helps us to appreciate and deepen our commitment, but it's not something upon which our fulfillment depends. Does that make sense to you? Beautiful. So let's see what it says here in the Torah, in the 6th Torah portion.
Kosher, I always thought was just kosher. It's not there's no.
So you always thought that kosher is a chok. Now there are 3 kinds of laws in the Torah. There are laws that are logical, mishpatim, laws that are testimonial, eidos, and laws that are illogical, irrational, just decrees. They're called chokim. So you're saying that you always thought of kosher as a chok. Interesting. You know, a lot of people say that kosher is a healthy diet. You know, there's a new grocer that's opening here in Palm Beach Gardens. It's called Plum Grocer or something. Plum something. And I was reading about this Plum, where what they do is that they offer all sorts of healthy diets, organic foods. Amongst them are kosher foods. I'm not sure how much kosher. They're going to be opening up on PGA corner, like US 1, I think. But what they seem to classify kosher as some sort of a healthy diet, which is nice. I guess it's good for business for us to say that kosher is a healthy diet, but it's not actually the reason why we keep kosher. If somebody was to discover tomorrow while eating meat and milk is actually a good thing for you, we're not going to say, okay, then we're going to change. We don't do it that way. We do it because that's what God said. We do it because it's a chok. If we can also understand matoiv manoim, how much better that is, it makes it even more sweet. But it's not something upon which our commitment, our fulfillment depends. Right. So let's look at the verse on page 663. It's really 661 at the bottom of the page. No, it's not. 663 at the bottom of the page. God spoke to Moshe, instructing him to convey his words to Aaron. Speak to the 2 of you, to the Israelites, saying, the following are the creatures that you may eat. As Moses and in turn Aaron, his sons, and the princes mentioned specific animals, he showed them specimens of each. Can you imagine? Moses had a whole zoo going on. Yeah, he was showing them all the animals, right? Among all the land animals, page 665, any whose feet are not only partially cloven, but completely split into at least 2 sub-feet, and that regurgitates its cud. So these are the signs of the kosher animals. It's got to have a split hoof, and it's got to be able to ruminate, to regurgitate its cud. The prohibition against eating animals that do not meet these requirements, couched later as a restrictive commandment, is here also subject to an active commandment. You must only eat such animals. Okay, whatever. But next verse, but those animals that regurgitate the cud or have split feet. But of the animals that do regurgitate the cud and split feet, you must not eat the camel because it has only one sign, it ruminates, but doesn't have completely cloven hoof. The hyrax, the hare, and the pig, all of them have one sign and not the other. Okay? So Chassidus comes in and explains to us the secret behind, or the spirituality behind the reasons for the kosher animals. For starters, the Rebbe points out that you got to have a hoof. Hoof. What's a hoof? Well, first, before that, even 1 second. What is the sensitivity about food? It's very interesting that Jewish people were sensitive about the food that they eat about 3,000 years before the rest of the world was. You know, whilst the rest of the world was eating whatever they wanted, Jewish people were very, very careful about what food we've been eating since the dawn of our nation, which is very interesting because we've always intuitively understood that we are what we eat, that the food becomes part and parcel of our bodies, and therefore, in the words of Nachmanides, the Ramban, we actually assume the characteristics of the animals that we eat. That's what Nachmanides says, spiritually speaking. Which means if you eat tame animals, you're able to remain tame. But if you're eating wild animals or predatory animals, then you become a wilde chaya. That's exactly what Nachmanides is saying. And that's the reason why we need to be so careful, so meticulous of the foods that we eat. It's not like, who's going to notice? No, this could destroy your marriage. This could destroy your relationship with your children. If you eat an animal which is a bird of prey, we haven't spoken about birds yet, but a predatory animal, then you might just become that attribute which will destroy your relationships. What are the signs of the kosher animals? We've said there's two signs. It's got to have a hoof that's split, and it's got to be able to ruminate. So what's the significance of the hoof? The Rebbe points out that instead of the animal walking on the face of the earth, even its lowest extremity, its foot, its paw, it's not a paw, it's a foot, right, is separated from the ground, which means even an animal whose head is pretty low comparative to the human being, the animal is horizontal, the human being is vertical, even the animal needs to have some sort of a mechitza, a separation, a divider separating between the animal and the earth in order to be able to remain pure. What this means is, on a very practical and personal level, is that you cannot wallow in the pool of self-indulgence and expect to remain pure. There have to be red lines and parameters in your life in order for you to be able to experience Kedusha, to experience holiness. The word Kadosh, holy, actually means separate, special, or designated. That's what the word Kadosh means. And if everything is allowed, if everything is permissible, there's no such thing as holiness. You have to be able to create boundaries in your life to separate the mundane from the spiritual, from the holy. Right? You've got to have a hoof that separates between the earthiness of the most mundane of our experiences and our lives. So you got to be able to have some boundaries and say, this is a place that I don't go to. This is a website that I don't visit. Right? You've got to be able to have some sort of a boundary. In Chassidus, in Tanya, we've learned about a concept called iskafia. Iskafia is when you are able to curb your appetite, you curb your enthusiasm, you limit your desire. You say, just because I want something, it doesn't mean that I have to have it. In fact, what Tanya is teaching us is that when we tell ourselves that when I want something and I don't allow myself to do it, then I'm taming my animal soul. That's what I'm doing. But if you say that whatever I desire, I'm going to have, you're giving free rein to your animal soul, and you're allowing your animal soul to run amok. That's why you've got to restrain your animal. Same with your car. With your car, you're careful to service it and to take care of it in a certain way. And you don't gun the, you don't put the pedal to the metal. You don't just go at the top speed just because it can. You make sure to be careful with your car. Right? If you have an animal, you keep it on a leash. Not at that. If you have an animal, you want to keep it on a leash. Yeah. Right? You want to keep it limited. You want to keep it restrained. Now, when you do this separation, it's important to do it in a way that it's split, that the hoof is split, where that portion of your life, which connects you to the earth, which is the hoof, has got to be split into two parts. Which means when a Jew engages with physical matters, it's got to be in a way which has two energies at play. Where a part of you, it's like Reagan said, trust but verify. Trust but verify, which means that you don't say, okay, well, now I'm in eating mode, therefore I'm going to eat like a pig. No. You say, I'm going to eat because I have to eat. But I'm going to do it, I'm going to eat like a Jew. I'm going to eat like a mindful person, where I'm only eating those foods that are good for me, for example. And I'm not eating like a glutton. I'm eating like a mensch, right? Where I'm not just eating because the food looks good, but I'm actually eating in order to energize my body to be able to do what I really am here for. Now, a lot of people will tell you that their very existence is to be able to indulge. Live to eat, right? Whereas the Jew eats to live. It's very interesting. We're just coming back from Pesach vacation, where you're able to see how people live during their free time. If you want to really get to know someone, look how they conduct themselves in their free time, right? And it's very interesting. You see other people about how they behave in their free time when nobody's telling them what to do, and it's not always very impressive. It's not very pretty. But when you see a Jew that is mindful about his vacation, he's trying to relax in order to regain strength, in order to refocus his momentum on his true purpose, which is serving God, that's a split hoof. That's a hoof that says, look, when I'm engaging in the mundane parts of my life, I'm on vacation, I'm eating, I'm doing some physical experience that I need to. I'm doing so in a way that I'm not fully invested, but it's got a split hoof. I've got some sort of a separation, some sort of a demarcation. Now, the second sign of the kosher animal is ruminating, right? What is that in spiritual service? What that represents is to be able to constantly challenge yourself, to constantly question yourself about whether what you're doing is the right thing, and to ask yourself to think things over, to walk on sure footing, to put one foot in front of the other carefully, to make sure that your steps are measured in order to ensure that your actions are pure. It's not enough to just say, well, I'm walking down a well-beaten path and I'm going to do what everybody else is doing. That's not okay. We're living in a world with tremendous questions, novelties. There's all sorts of experiences today that nobody's experienced before in the history of the world. I mean, think about it. We're dealing with technological advances, with modern technology, with experiences, with indulgences, with just gadgets in our lives. It's a question as simple as buying a phone for your child. At what age do you give a smartphone to your child? Think about that.
38.
At 38 years old. It's an interesting question, right? Just think about that for a second. No other generation in history had to ever grapple with that question before. And it's a scary realization that the day you give a smartphone to your child is the day that you will no longer be the center of their life. It's actually scary to think about that. What? Yeah, but at which age do you want to do that? And that's where you got to ruminate. You've got to constantly check and question and probe and reevaluate to see if the direction that you're going is correct. And maybe you made a mistake. If you made a mistake, then don't double down on your mistake, but fix it. Do whatever you can to fix that relationship, to fix the mistake that you might have made in order to ruminate. You got to keep on chewing that food over and over and over again. Now, when it comes to the kosher birds, I want to show you what they're. Yeah.
So there are 4 animals that are identified here that have one but not the other. Is it correct? Either we learned it here or I read it or it was in one of the classes that this is proof that God wrote the Torah. It could not have been man.
Right, because there were no other animals in the world.
Because no other animals have been found. And so if a man would have written the Torah, he had not gone beyond the Middle East. So how would you know what animals existed in Australia, in Antarctica,
in Indonesia,
in North America? Right,
there are animals being discovered to this very day. There are species that are still being discovered.
Right.
So how could anybody have ever known 3,250 years ago that there's only 4 exceptions to the rule of animals that have both signs?
That's it. So that's like evidence, hard evidence that it could not have been a man.
Absolutely.
A man would not have known the extent of all the animals. So how could
You'd have to be ridiculous to make such a statement. It's a train wreck to make such a statement. I mean, you could easily disprove the entire religion by making something so stupid to say a statement that says there's only 4 animals in the world that have this quality. I mean, seriously, with countless species. Exactly, with countless species out there, it's a problem, right? But the fact that the Torah, the author of the Torah, has the courage to be able to say there's only 4 animals that have this exception. Of course, that's a clear proof of the divine authorship of the Torah, absolutely. So I want to draw your attention to one last point, and that is to the birds. On page 667, middle of the page. Amongst fowl, you must consider the following loathsome and not eat them. They must not be eaten. They are loathsome. The griffin vulture, the bearded vulture, the osprey, the various species of vulture, the various types of crow, the ostrich, the cuckoo, the gull, the various species of sparrowhawk. Yep. The screech owl, the cormorant, the barn owl, barn owl. By the way, in my backyard the other night, I couldn't believe it. I came home, I see it in my backyard. My daughter shows me there's an owl. Isn't that cool to have an owl just hanging out? It's beautiful, right? Are they dangerous? Owls are dangerous.
Oh, they could be, sure could be.
The bat, the pelican, the magpie, the stork, the heron, the hoopoe, the atalef. I mean, there's just a whole list. I think it's 24 birds over here, which are listed in the Torah. The ones that you're not allowed to eat, everyone else you're allowed to eat. When it comes to the birds, first for starters, we know that any predatory birds are not kosher. We know that, right? It's interesting, by the way, that there was a great Kabbalist by the name of Rabbi Shaya Levi Horowitz. He wrote a book called the Shnei Luchos Sabris, the two tablets of the covenant, which is known by its acronym of the Shalah, Shalo. This Shalah, he lived 150 years ago. He says that he once saw a turkey attacking another insect or something, or some sort of a creature, maybe another bird, in a predatory manner, and therefore he said that the turkey is a bird of prey. So descendants of this guy, of the Shalah, have a tradition, they don't eat turkey. So it's not biblical, it's not rabbinic, it's like a family tradition of his family. So birds of prey they don't eat, we don't eat. We don't eat birds of prey because we don't believe the turkey is a predatory animal. But maybe it looked predatory to him. I don't know. Maybe he had one that was high. I don't know. But when it comes to the birds of prey, there aren't actually signs in the Torah that identify and define them. Rather, when it comes to the birds of prey, to the birds, it's based on masoras. Masoras, which means a tradition. It's based on the Masorah. What does that mean? It means that it's not enough to be an intellectual. It's not enough to be a person that works on himself. You need to be connected to those people who came before you. You need to be connected to your tradition, to your heritage, and to your legacy, because without the Masorah, there'd be no way, without the tradition, there'd be no way intellectually to be able to independently evaluate which are the kosher animals and which are not. I mean, even here, one of the birds in this translation is not even translated. It's called the atalef, which is a direct translation of the Hebrew. So what exactly is an atalef? Now in Hebrew, today, modern Hebrew, the word atalef means a bat.
The bats aren't birds.
I don't know, but if the bat is in this list already. The bat is already in the list. I don't know, maybe it's talking about flying creatures. Oh, it's a rodent.
The bat is a rodent.
It's a rodent with wings.
Yeah.
Interesting. That is interesting. Huh. Fascinating. Okay. Either way, even here, the atalef, you don't even know what it is. It's not even translated, right? So from here we learn the importance of the Masorah, the importance of our commitment to our tradition, to those who came before us. It's interesting, you know. I was in Panama, right, for Pesach, and we were trying to arrange a transportation back from where we were to the airport, and we were a large group of people. We were, I don't know, maybe 35 people or so. So what happened? The guy in charge, he told us to send him a text message because it was too complicated. Send him a text message where it'll all be clear. Fine. So we sent him a text message. And after we sent the text message, I said to my family, I said, now I'm going to go over to him to give him the oral Torah version of what I explained to him. Because, we needed a bus and a car and a truck for the luggage. It was like a whole procedure, right? I said, it's not enough that he's getting the written version. He's going to need an oral context to make sure that he understands what we're talking about. Because how often does it happen that by just merely having a manuscript, you can easily misinterpret the context? You're like, oh, you meant that kind of a bus. I thought you were talking about a school bus. I didn't realize you were talking about a coach bus, right? You're talking about a bus with the luggage underneath. You're talking about a bus with air conditioning, without air conditioning. The bus is going to make these kind of stops. It's not going to make these kind of stops. Not everything can be put into writing. And that's why it's important. I actually thought of it at the moment that I wanted to share, that it's not enough to have a written document, any written document that's going to be conveyed that's going to convey the true spirit of what was intended needs to have an oral accompaniment. And that's why you have the written Torah together with the oral Torah. That's why you need the Masorah. You need a rabbi who's got a rabbi that goes all the way back to Moses and Mount Sinai, who passes on the oral tradition for us to be able to say that I understand which are the words that are kosher. If you're going to be able to experience a life that is kosher, if you're going to be able to experience a life in which you are spiritually uplifted and that you're connecting with the divine, that you're tuning, that you're logging off and tuning in, right? If you're going to be able to live a life that is spiritually connected, then that's going to require your ability to have a mentor, to have a rabbi that's going to be able to lift you up and carry you through the tradition of our ancient past.
Got it.
Okay.
So what's wrong with an ostrich?